Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Better Community Podcast. This is the space where we talk about growth, change, creativity, and the people who are quietly or boldly shaping what's next. My guest today is David Chislett. His mission to unlock creativity wherever it hides. He's a speaker, poet, writer, trainer, and certified foresight mindset facilitator. And he's got his great way of making creativity feel not just exciting, but totally doable, even if you don't think of yourself as creative. As I know, David has been in the game for over 30 years, from publishing and music to coaching and workshops. Whether he's on a stage, in a team session, or writing poetry, he's helping people understand how they solve problems and how they can collaborate better by embracing their creative selves. Today we are diving into creative thinking, dealing with change, and finding the courage to try new things, both in our work and our lives. I think you are really going to enjoy this one because the way he's also talking and sharing his experience and insights is really fabulous. So let's dive in. David, I'm so happy to have you today. Maybe you want to add something to my introduction and then we can start our conversation.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. It's good to be on the podcast. I don't think I've really got anything to add to the intro except to say that I've always worked alone, and the last 5 or 6 years I've been making a big effort to change that to operate somewhat more in a team, in a community. So which is why I'm here on Bennu. So yeah, that's a big part of it.
That's great, David. I always like to start with a bit of a story. What led you down this creative path? Was there a moment where it just clicked for you and then you started this journey?
Well, I mean, the path of my personal creativity started when I was very young, and that was, I mean, I didn't even know what I was doing could be called creativity when I started out. But the professional path I'm on now is came with a very distinct moment where I was like, oh, okay, this is something I need to do. So I had been living in the Netherlands for about 5 years, and I just started out doing whatever I could, which in my case meant teaching business English to mainly Dutch companies. And I was getting bored, and it's not really something had always wanted to do with my life. So I was looking for options, and I got in touch with a friend of mine, Beth Farris. She was running these clarity sessions for entrepreneurs. And well, she wasn't actually. She wanted to. And she said to me, "Can I test my stuff out on you?" And I was like, "Sure." And over a 3-day process, we basically figured out that, okay, so I've always been creative. I've always worked in the creative industries. It's something that just seems to come quite naturally to me. But on top of that, as a band manager, as a promoter, as a publicist, as a journalist, I've spent my entire working life helping other people realize their creative dreams. And I would never have described what I did that way, as helping people. I that was not a way I saw myself or saw what I was doing. But when she said that, I realized that actually everything I've learned could be a really powerful tool to help other people discover their own path, make their own way, and actually extract a lot more meaning from their lives, because that's what creativity does. It piles the pieces up, it adds to things. So it was during that final session with Beth where I suddenly went, okay, yeah, this is the thing that I need to do.
So, meaning helping others, I mean, helping people
Yeah.
via being creative is the ties. that, I mean, connect all those backgrounds you had and all those experiences, including music, poetry, business training, and the things like that, right?
Yeah, because I believe that everybody has the capacity to be creative, but
Uh-huh.
quite often, because of the way we are uh, uh, culturalized, socialized, how we are educated, how our companies work, how we are managed, from actually a very young age, we are discouraged from being too creative because it's people don't really understand it, and so the idea of creativity gets pushed into this little box labeled art. And anybody who practices art is clearly a weirdo and can't be trusted. So the rest of us have to be quite careful with how we go about being creative. So what I spend most of my time doing is getting people to realize that actually creativity is not art. Art is one product of creativity. The creative process is what lets us solve problems, adapt to change, innovate, invent, discover, learn, and so on and so forth. So that's the sort of foundation stone of my work now, is helping people understand that and accept that they actually are creative. Because once you do that, it becomes a lot more easier to acquire the habits and the skills to help you use that.
Fabulous. And as you mentioned, 5 years ago, around 5 years ago, you moved to the Netherlands. How did moving from South Africa to the Netherlands influence the way you think about creativity and problem solving?
Well, when I moved to the Netherlands, actually 11 years ago, the whole creative,
11 years ago.
yeah. But I think it's a good question because, South Africa is an emerging economy where it's not as sophisticated. There's not as many structures in place to help you make your ideas real. And as a result, if you work for yourself in a country like South Africa, you have to be very adaptable, very inventive, very brave, and very creative, really. Um, and I guess I took a lot of that for granted because everybody I knew was self-employed and they were all always just making it up as we go along and figuring stuff out. Whereas in a more highly regulated market like the Netherlands, there's help, there's structures, there's, you know, facilities. But as a result, sometimes people aren't actually as creative as they could be because of all of this structure. So the big change for me was to stop making assumptions about people's willingness to go out there and do their own thing and try things a different way.
But still, a lot of people still say, I'm just not a creative person. I mean,
Yeah.
and you think creativity is not just about art,
Hmm.
it's kind of way of living, as I understood
Yes.
when you explained. In your experience, what holds people back from really using their creativity at work or in life? And how you usually try to help them in a different way?
Right. So the thing about being creative is that it requires you to do new things, things that other people haven't done. So there very often aren't rules or guidelines or structures. So there's a lot of risk, which means that you as a human being then have to expose yourself in a way that can be really uncomfortable. And when you combine that with at work, if there is anything less than total psychological safety, if there's a lot of judgment, if there's a lot of bullying or teasing, or just like a bad work culture, people are too scared to act in that way, to expose themselves, because they've seen what happens to other people when it goes wrong, when they then fail, or the experiment doesn't work out, or they make mistakes. There are immediate huge penalties in one way or another. So, you know, everybody is creative to either just one or maybe even 100%. But if your environment is so unsafe that it's not wise to show that, it's really, really difficult. So, and this is why I often really work more with teams than individuals, because I can help you or anybody understand that they actually are creative, but I can't create the conditions for them then to be creative at work, for example, because that's not in their control. At home, it is, I'm sure. And this is the thing that's really interesting is that once you realize that you can be creative, you then need to change your environment around you to help you express it. You need to be sitting in a place which is inspiring and physically comfortable and safe. You have to get into the habit of practicing the skills required to be that creative. And you have to turn up every day. And you have to stay motivated because it's not always going to work. And sometimes it's not going to come out the way you want. And you have to be able to say, okay, that's not what I wanted, but what did I learn? Let's try again. All of that requires a lot of resilience, a lot of focus, a lot of discipline. And if your environment is constantly saying, bleh, this is a bad idea, what are you doing? That's a mistake. That's not what we wanted. That's why people stop. So it's very important that culture and team dynamics are part of any conversation about helping people step into their creative power, because it can be scary and there can be penalties.
Yeah, and the point is, as you mentioned, the context could be really important. That's why maybe we need to find the right communities to be part of them. And maybe sometimes, even if you cannot change your environment because of any reason, you mean it's not possible, for example, moving from one country to another country, at least you can find some people who are in the same, page and bring you kind of opportunity of support system or sense of belonging, then maybe they can cover or support you uh, to be, for example, creative. Am I right?
Yeah, very definitely. If you're at work and the upper management says we need to be more innovative, but every time you bend the rules a little bit to do things a bit differently because you think it'll work better and you get punished for it, their actions do not match what they're saying, and that's a problem. So leaving environments like that to find ones with more like-minded people where you're allowed to experiment, where there is the chance to fail and to learn, is really important. Sometimes you can change that environment from within if you have agency, if you have power. But if you don't, quite often you have no choice but to leave, to go somewhere else.
So, and as I know and I check, so for example, your previous content or whatever you already shared, you talk a lot about navigating change.
Yeah.
Why do you think creativity is such a key tool during uncertain time? Because we are living in an era, in a
Yeah.
time that everything is changing every time, every day you can experience something new. So, why it's important?
Well, because change results in uncertainty in the same way that creativity does. If you think of a new way to do things, it's uncertain whether it's going to work or not. You will only find out once you try. You can think about it as many ways as you like, and you can look for similar examples, but you will not know, you will not have certainty until you try. And change results in the same situations. Things have changed. Our company has been bought. Our country has been invaded. Um, AI is making my job, go away. It's disappearing. Now there is uncertainty that I don't have a guide to do what I need to do. Now, if you're not used to acting in uncertainty, you can freeze. Because you could just go, well, no one's telling me what to do. There are no rules. I don't know what these actions will result in, so I'm going to do nothing because I'm risk averse. But if you are used to being creative and stepping into that uncertainty to discover new answers, new options, you have a bigger chance of successfully navigating that change. And that's it for me, is that creativity is the key tool which we have as human beings to deal with the uncertainty that change brings.
So it's easy to talk about, but in reality, it's a little bit difficult. Better than me. I've been experienced a lot being that kind of, I mean, the situation of freezing or, I've been stuck in lots of moments. My question is, what do you say to someone who's stuck, either creatively or professionally, and doesn't know where to start?
Yeah. So the worst thing you can do when you're stuck is think harder about the problem. Because when we do that, we are expending a lot of mental effort rerunning everything we already know. So the first thing to do is to stop and to take a break and to get involved with something completely different, to free up your conscious attention, to stop it from obsessing on the known. Now, the reason why this is so important is that your conscious mind, when you're actively reasoning and following fact trails, it only uses about 20% of the active capacity of your brain. And it's really quite quick because it's very pattern based. So you're making click, 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 click connections, right? Because everything's known. But in order to get insight and intuition around what we know, takes a lot more time because that utilizes a far greater amount of your actual brain and your actual memory. And that only really kicks off when you stop being consciously focused on problems. This is the explanation why if you were at an event yesterday and you bumped into somebody you knew and you were talking about a mutual acquaintance and neither of you could remember this person's name, like for the whole time you were chatting, you couldn't remember the third person's name. You go home and then as you're falling asleep, you remember the name, right? Because at that event, your attention went somewhere else and you started talking about other things, but your unconscious mind was still going, what was the name? And it starts sorting through that vast library of everything you've ever been exposed to until it found it. You can have eureka moments 2 weeks after asking yourself, how do I solve this problem? And so when you're stuck, if you insist on only consciously, rationally attacking a problem, all that does is reinforce how stuck you are. You need to give your whole brain more time to process, and you stand a better chance of getting nice answers or different answers.
Good. And following the previous question, what's a small habit or exercise you recommend to help people flex their creative muscle a bit more every day?
Yeah. For me, a key thing that everybody can easily learn to get better at is being observant. I mentioned pattern recognition a couple of minutes ago, and a lot of what we do as human beings is based on pattern recognition. We see the beginning of something and our brain goes, oh, that looks a lot like this other thing that often happens. And then you stop paying attention because your brain goes, it's a pattern. I know how to react. And a pre-made response, comes out, a behavior. But when you're observing, you're not looking for pattern. You're just looking. You're looking at everything. You're looking at the details. You're looking at the background. You're looking at what else is going on. You're not engaging with the categorization and judgment process that our brain always does in order to say, oh, that's a pattern. And when you do that, you stand a chance of spotting extra details that show that this isn't, in fact, the pattern that you think it was. There's something else going on. And it's that, because creativity is also about patterns, but it's about bringing information from outside the existing pattern, the existing template, which changes it. If you think of Agile as a business process, right? It's a software development tool. And yet now big corporations use it to be more efficient. Why? Because someone realized that actually that process would work really well in a team dynamic over here. They observed Agile long enough and compared it to what they knew about this other bunch of behavior and made a connection. And if you're not observing, if you're just saying pattern, 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 it's very hard to do that. So if you need to be more creative, pay more attention to the whole story, to as many details as you can, and you will start to see different things.
And meaning at the same time, what I understand is sometimes it seems you're wasting your time by doing something not related to whatever you have to do. But in another way, it seems you are experiencing something to understand that specific context in a different way and maybe bring some other solutions for whatever you are coping with. Am I right?
Yes. So we tend to see the world as being made up of blocks, right? Which have a beginning and an end, and they are separate from each other. And that's why we say, oh, you must focus, you must do this, and then you must do that. But if you look at anything about quantum mechanics and modern science, you realize that actually nothing is a block with a beginning and an end. Everything is interconnected, which means that almost anything can be related to some other thing. There is a connection somewhere. But if you're only looking at the block itself, at the beginning, at the end, you will never become aware of it, and you'll just miss it like it didn't exist.
But at the same time, most of people prefer, to just focus on one specific, for example, whatever.
Yeah.
So, meaning if you are focusing on something, not paying attention to other parts of I don't know, the things you are doing or the board, you're not creative.
Well, look, I think this is also nobody's in creative mode 100% of every waking day. I mean, I'm a very creative person, but I don't spend all my day zoomed out looking at everything I can. I zoom out long enough to see I think this could work and do some research and questioning, but then I zoom right in and I'm going, right, now I need to build this. Now I need to deploy logic, rationality, systems, processes in order to make a thing. And then when I'm done, I then zoom out again and say, well, how does that click into other things? Does this actually work? What else can I learn? And then I zoom back in to fix. So it's that ability to move between thought modes that it becomes incredibly important. Because without hyper rationality and logic, creativity wouldn't be very useful. You're like, oh, wonderful. What do we do with it? I've got no idea. But as soon as you say, oh, that's a really interesting idea, how do we do that? Then you snap back into a more practical, rule based way of thinking and you can do something with it.
So, maybe do you use any specific framework in your work? I mean, in any case, if you want to bring some more opportunities in terms of helping people, I mean, any specific framework for helping people or organizations to be more creative?
Yeah, well, I work with a lot of different tools. More recently, I work with the Foresight creative problem solving framework, which is a really simple framework with 4 steps. That's why it's called Foresight. And it's a great way of understanding how we choose to solve problems. In other words, where our preference for being creative lies. It's also a great way to help us understand people around us and why maybe they annoy us or why we actually work together so well. And so it's also a very valuable tool to look at teams through. So foresight consists of clarifying, which is collecting information, analyzing data, asking lots of questions, trying to understand the full story of a situation. Then the next step is ideation, which is generating lots of potential solutions. The third step is developing, which is selecting the solution which we think is going to be the most likely one to work, and then developing it, like building it out into a plan. And then the fourth step is implementation. Now, some people, if you give them a problem, the first thing they're going to do is tell you 25 ideas. Other people, you give them a problem, the first thing they're going to do is ask you a ton of questions so they can understand it better. Some people are just going to want to start trying stuff out. They just want to do. And other people would like, wait, I need a plan, right? And those are the big 4 types of the foresight dynamic. Now, if you've got a team which needs to come up with solutions to problems and implement them, and everybody just wants to ask questions and make plans, you've got a problem because there will be very little creativity and there will be very little implementation. So what foresight does, it gives a really simple language to teams to say, okay, when there's a problem, you prefer to do this thing. Notice I use the word prefer. It's not that you cannot do the other things, but that's where you're on fire. You want to. It makes you enthusiastic, which probably means that's where you do your best work.
Yeah, I like meaning you are trying to bring different point of views and aspects.
Correct.
On the table, it means, first of all, we need to have different opportunities of engaging different people with different point of views at the same time. Sometimes maybe you are acting in a way that it's not specifically your superpower, but it's a must
Yeah.
because we need that approach. Otherwise, we cannot fix the problem or bring creativity in our job or the things like that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example of a team I worked with where the person whose job it was to take all the ideas and build the plans according to their profile was not a developer. And in the whole session, she actually put her hand up and said, it's fine, I can do this, but it takes me way longer than it should. It costs me so much energy, and I don't actually like doing it. And the rest of the team was like, "Oh, but you're so good at it," and they were like, "Yeah, but I hate it." And that surprised everybody.
You work at the intersection of arts, business, and education.
Yeah.
How do you think those words can learn from each other more?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I managed musicians for a very long time. And because in our society, the idea of art and business is so separate, many musicians just never thought it was necessary to understand how the business works. They're like, our job is to make the music and that's it. And what I always said to them was that you need to learn the business because what you're saying now is you want to be a professional football player, but you don't want to learn the rules of the game. How far do you think you'll go if you don't know the rules of football and try and be a professional? You won't, because you will always be making mistakes and getting sent off and what have you. And so for me, I think in the art world, just understanding the principles. Where does the money come from? Why does it happen that way? Where does it go? What are the structures that have been set up to facilitate the flow of money? What does that even mean? You need to understand that. You don't need to be a professional business person, but if you don't understand it, you run the risk of being exploited and missing chances and, yeah, ending up bitter and twisted and not as successful as you want to be. And so that's for me, those two things. And then, of course, what business can learn from artists is, yeah, it's great to have a plan and it's great to have strict goals and KPIs and KPAs. But if you don't just let that all loose every now and then, you run the risk of getting out of date because you stick so strongly to the plan and to the rules that you don't evolve. And the artists are continuously evolving. That's why people find them so weird to be around because they're thinking about stuff that nobody else is. And if your business is only thinking about what's right in front of them right now, you won't exist in 5 years. In fact, you may not even exist in 2 years. So that's a big takeaway. But we don't live in a world where any of that is true anymore, where you have powerful tools like AI, which can do absolutely everything that all of this very closed A/B testing of education has always delivered. So then you got to ask yourself, well, how do I measure whether this person knows what they're talking about, whether they've actually learned anything from all the information we've spent the last 4 years giving them? So universities are really struggling with plagiarism in academic essays. They're just AI generated and they all look the same. So, well, maybe the problem there is not so much that people are plagiarizing, but that this was actually never a good way to see if people know anything. Because as soon as you step into business, they say the same thing. University graduates don't actually know how to do the job. They know all this stuff, but they don't know how to use it. And that's a warning sign that we've been hearing about for 30 years. But instead, education just stuck to its guns and did the way that it's always done. So I think they could also benefit from looking at the artist's way, looking at how business actually works, and changing their entire approach and measurement system in order to reflect the reality that people enter when they leave an education organization.
Yeah, in terms of coping with some new trends or some new opportunities that arise, same as AI you mentioned,
Hmm.
it reminded me something different as well. It's about more, I mean, when you are getting older. Why do you think, or generally speaking, maybe you are not agree with me, I mean, why do you think creative confidence tends to drop as we get older?
Yeah. It's so you're probably referring to the NASA testing that was done in the 60s, right? Where 95% of children were creative geniuses and only 2% of adults are at that level. And if you read the whole study, you'll notice it checks in at 2 or 3 or 5-year intervals, and you'll notice that the reported creativity levels drop as soon as the kids start engaging with standardized testing. So basically, what standardized testing does to you as a human being is say it doesn't matter what you think. The answer is right or it's wrong. There's no gray, there's no degree, there's no relativity. It's right or it's wrong. And so that's how our whole education system works. And when you're doing art class, the teacher's going to say to you sooner or later, you can't draw. You're never going to be a success at this. Do something else because what you're doing doesn't conform to what they need to grade you on for you to pass the course. And what that does is it causes us to experience shame. And we have a deep emotional reaction to being re-exposed to the opportunity for that shame. So we avoid it. So it's a massive cultural issue where we are essentially crippling our species and our capacity to think differently and be inventive and be creative because we have this idea that everyone needs to know the right and the wrong answer of a very specific set of stuff. And that's how we run our companies, and that's the lens we see the world through.
If you had to design a future school, I know you already engage in a way with the concepts, but if you had to design a future school, what would creativity education look like there?
Well, first of all, there would be no creativity education
Oh,
because, if you think about it, when you learn something, you literally create a new neuron connection in your brain.
uh-huh.
On a physical level, learning is creating stuff. My biggest frame of reference is the unteaching or unschooling movement from the States, where parents not only homeschool their kids, which I'm not going to try and do. I don't think I could do that, but they also have no plan. So if the child comes into their homeschooling space and says, "I want to know about dinosaurs," they say, "Great, today we're going to look at dinosaurs." And they go down into dinosaurs for as long as the kid is interested. They go to museums, they read books, they watch YouTube videos, they go for walks, they go to talks, they just go, 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 go. Because while the child is finding out about dinosaurs, they're building their vocabulary, they're learning to read, they stay motivated and focused because they're interested, and there's no test, so there's no opportunity for them to go, "Oh, but I can't do this." And then after 3 days, child comes back and says, "I'm really curious about numbers. I mean, they don't look different to letters. Where do they come from? And how do we even do this stuff?" And then you dive into that. And so when you're led by interest, by intrinsic motivation, you get better results. When you lead with extrinsic motivation, "I will give you something if you do this," results are not guaranteed. Only some people are turned on by extrinsic motivations like money or medals or fancy certificates. And so for me, schooling would need to follow a more intrinsically motivated model and a much looser curriculum.
Mm.
Because what happens to those university graduates when they get to a company and they can't do the job? They learn. They go and they do, and they adapt and they change. And that's maybe the only advantage at the moment of a university education is that you know how to do that. But everybody should know how to do that. We should all be focused on critical thinking skills, creative thinking skills, and not learning black and white. 1+1 is 2, wrong, right, yes, no. That will be the death of the human species if we can continue to do that.
As the last question, in a way, what's your dream project? Something you haven't done yet, but really want to.
Uh, oh, I don't know. Strangely enough, I'm not really thinking in terms of projects anymore. For me, what I really want to be doing is engage every single day in helping as many people as I can be more creative. And that's like my big star on the horizon. And as a result of that, I don't really have strong definitions of what that should look like. So I'm involved in collaborations with musicians, with improvisation experts, with all sorts of different kinds of people, in order to find new ways to unlock this puzzle for people. And that's what moves me, and that's what I want to continue on. It really isn't. Yeah, I mean, I've published books, I've made TV, I've made a documentary film, I've done a lot of projects, but right now I don't have one, and I'm not sure. I mean, I'll probably write some more books, but for me, it's more about the longer term process. That's what I want to be doing for the rest of my life.
And any last word you want to share or emphasizing on everything that maybe I forgot to ask or you want to stress on it?
I think the most important thing to stress is to remember that most of the time, if you choose to do something differently, the consequences are not as big as you think they're going to be. Most of the time, you're not going to die. But that's actually not what we're scared of. What we're scared of is that if I do things differently, I might get different results, which means I will then need to change my behavior, which means I might not know who I am anymore. And so my last point is for people to remember that you are not your behavior. You are you. And your behavior can change and you can still be the same person. Don't let that hold you back.
David, thank you. This was such an inspiring and, insightful conversation. I really like how you make creativity feel less scary. You show that it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be fun, personal, and actually really useful in everyday life. I like the way you are thinking how to bring creativity in our daily life, in the flow of our life.
Hmm.
For anyone listening, if something in this chat spoke to you, go check out David's website at davidchislett.com, as I know, or find him on LinkedIn. We are sharing his LinkedIn as well in the description of this episode. He has lots of helpful tools, workshops, and ideas to help you or your team think more creatively and, work in a better ways. Thank you again, David. And to all of you tuning in, as always, keep learning, stay curious, and keep building what's happening next. So, see you soon and talk to you, David. If you have anything else to share with us, feel free to, just mention it.
Thank you, Ben. Keep well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Cool.